On a sun-washed August morning in the summer of 1608, with the light gleaming off the calm waters, the intrepid explorer John Smith sailed up the Chesapeake Bay to the Patuxent River. Even though Smith was well-traveled, he was still moved to comment on the landscape and bounty surrounding him.
The western shore, by which we sailed, we found well-watered but very mountainous and barren. The valleys very fertile, but extremely thick of small woods, as well as trees, and much frequent with wolves, bears, deer, and other wild beasts. The streams were crystal clear and full of fish.
There was no better promoter for colonization in the area than Smith when he wrote,
"Within is a country that may have the prerogative over the most pleasant place ever known for large and pleasant navigable rivers. Heaven and earth never agreed better to frame a place for man's habitation, were it fully manured and inhabited by industrious people. Here are mountains, hills, plains, valleys, rivers and brooks, all running into a fair bay, compassed but for the mouth with fruitful and delightsome land."
Along the way, Smith recorded 17 Indian villages of Algonquin-speaking Indians along the Patuxent River, including the Patuxent tribe, the most powerful of the chiefdoms on the river. Theirs was an economy based on growing corn, beans, squash, sunflowers, and tobacco. They also gathered a variety of wild plant foods and materials from the woods and rivers. Living in a forest environment and with no plows, the Indians used the swidden, or slash and burn method. They would cut around the bigger trees and burn saplings, which would create potash for fertilizer. Later on, these cleared old fields, as they were called, would become very desirable.
In 1634, Cecilius Calvert, the second Lord Baltimore, sent 2 ships from England with the first Maryland settlers. When the Ark and the Dove arrived, their passengers settled in what is now St. Mary's County, just south of Calvert County. Many of these colonists then moved into Calvert. The first colonists used many of the techniques derived from Indian culture for hunting, fishing, and crop choice. Colonists also traded products for corn and other food. Some colonists took over the cleared Indian fields. They had to build houses in which to live. They had to plant gardens to grow food. Soon the settlers began building farms of their own, apart from the Indians. Through the expansion of these farms, the Patuxent Indians gradually lost their land. Intermarriage, infectious disease, and forced relocation also served to remove Calvert County's first occupants from their homeland. Some remained and became laborers for the colonists, but most moved upriver to a reservation in the 1650s.
The first immigrants to Calvert County included English gentry, who were quickly followed by Puritans, Huguenots, Quakers, and Scots. Calvert County was established in 1654 by Cecilius Calvert. The Act Concerning Religion, which was passed in 1649, allowed the settlement of nonconformist Christians in Maryland. Calvert County, as well as Charles and St. Mary's, were settlements where Catholics could practice their religion legally. In 1692, the Anglican Church was established as the official church of Maryland, and the colonial capital was soon moved to Annapolis.
In 1695, parts of Calvert County were redistricted into St. Mary's, Charles, and Prince George's, and its boundaries became substantially what they are today. Calverton was the original county seat. Located on the Patuxent River, it proved to be inconvenient. In 1722, the county seat was moved to Williams Old Field, which was designated as the site of the new courthouse. The town that was created was called Prince Frederick.
You might wonder, what drove this colonization? A chance for a new life and a chance for increased wealth for the settlers and the British Crown. Trade was critical to founding the colonies. The British Crown was looking for revenue, and the settlers were looking for ways to maximize their investments and opportunities. George Calvert, the first Lord Baltimore, petitioned King Charles I for a land grant along the shores of the Chesapeake, that he may do the king in my country more service there by planting of tobacco.
Tobacco has left an indelible mark on the history of Maryland. For over 300 years, tobacco, the money crop, has been a source for income and a means of prosperity for the residents of Calvert County. Earl Buddy Hance, a fourth-generation farmer and Secretary of Agriculture under Governor O'Malley, talks about the importance of tobacco in colonial Maryland.
If you look back, the original Maryland charter, Maryland was developed to grow tobacco to send back to England. If you go back in all the records in Southern Maryland, the courthouses, the old churches, they were all built with tobacco. I mean, tobacco drove this region. You didn't pay your bills with money, you paid your bills with tobacco. The Christ Church up here was built in 1627 or something like that, and they've got back the old records, and your tithe was not money, your tithe was so many pounds of tobacco, and then the church would sell and barter the tobacco. I mean, it was the economy.
Tobacco had been used in the Americas long before European settlers arrived and introduced it to Europe, where it became popular. Native people used it to cement social bonds and in sacred settings, and as medicine. At high doses, tobacco can be hallucinogenic, and Native Americans did not always use the drug recreationally. Instead, it was consumed as a psychoactive substance among some tribes. This was done only by experienced shamans or medicine men. It was believed that tobacco was a gift from the Creator, and that the exhaled tobacco smoke was capable of carrying one's thoughts and prayers to heaven.
Apart from smoking, tobacco had a number of uses as medicine. As a painkiller, it was used for earache and toothache, and occasionally as a poultice. Uncured tobacco was often eaten, used in enemas, or drunk as an extracted juice. Early missionaries often reported on the ecstatic state caused by tobacco. Western cultures, however, did not use it for religious purposes, although religious use of tobacco is still common among many indigenous peoples, particularly in the Americas.
After the death of his father in 1632, Cecilius Calvert, the second Lord Baltimore, was granted a land charter by King James I of England. Calvert eventually became proprietor of Maryland and introduced an Act for Advancing the Trade of Tobacco. The act required all Maryland imports and exports after August 31, 1685, to pass through designated town sites. These sites would provide warehouses for the storage of tobacco, shaping the first commercial centers in the new colony.
The British had expanded their holdings in the colonies by the mid-1600s. In his first year as king, Charles II passed a Navigation Act requiring the exclusive use of English ships for trade between England and the colonies. This legislation also limited exports of products such as sugar and tobacco to England or its colonies.
By 1708, tobacco and other crops had prospered to the point that 4 Calvert County locations, St. Leonard, Calverton, Huntingtown, and Lower Marlborough, were added to the list of official ports of entry. The British inspected the tobacco at these locations, and taxes were levied on the crop. Tobacco was such an integral part of the colonial economy that it was used as a standard for the local currency instead of paper money or coin.
Tobacco was used in Europe ever since Columbus brought it back from his voyages. Colonists learned how to grow tobacco from the Native Americans. Settlers in Maryland found that the soil along the rivers was good for growing the best tobacco. Western Europe has long preferred Maryland tobacco for its slow and even burning quality. Tobacco was also very easy to transport. After the tobacco was harvested and dried, it was packed into large barrels called hogsheads. Hundreds of pounds of tobacco could be packed into one hogshead. The hogsheads were then moved from place to place by rolling them. The hogshead would protect the tobacco from water and damage while it was being rolled or shipped.
Tobacco was an extremely labor-intensive crop and needed a lot of attention to grow properly. The tops of the plants needed to be pinched to make the bottom leaves grow larger. Tobacco worms attacked it and had to be picked off by hand. At first, the colonists' children had this job. Sometimes they let turkeys pick off and eat the tobacco worms. The harvested leaves needed to be dried, sorted, and packed into hogsheads. and thousands of hogsheads needed to be built. By this time, a lot of southern Maryland was made up of tobacco farms called plantations. At first, the name plantation was given to any farm, even a small one, where the owners worked alongside their servants. Later, a plantation was the name given to a farm that was worked by servants or slaves. Many servants and slaves were used to grow tobacco on plantations.
During the 1800s, Calvert County's main industry was tobacco agriculture. This made Calvert County reliant on slave labor. When the Civil War began, Calvert Countians were torn. Officially, Maryland was aligned with the North, but the tobacco growers in Calvert were most likely very sympathetic with the Southern cause. There was a military draft during the Civil War. Most white men did not serve with the Union forces. However, hundreds of African Americans from Calvert County served with the U.S. colored troops. After the war, many of them returned to Calvert County and built up their lives and communities.